Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I'm Luke Freeman.
And I'm Hannah Broderud, and today I'm honored to introduce our guest, Sherrie Grabot. Sherrie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate this. It's such an honor to be here with both of you.
Yeah, and just for a little bit of context, we're recording this in San Antonio, Texas. Luke and I are attending the NAHARA, the National Native American HR Association's annual conference. And so we're connecting with some really purpose-led individuals at this conference. And Sherrie, you're one of them. Could you give us just a little bit of background? Tell us about what you do today and maybe quick background. What led you to do the work that you do today?
Sure. Well, today I run really two entities, GuidedChoice. That's our retirement wellness advice and managed account solutions, where we provide really advice and managed accounts for retirement plans, both in the public sector as well as the private sector. And then we launched about 2 years ago a separate division, 3 Nickels. And 3 Nickels is really geared on save, spend, give, the 3 things you can do with your money, and giving you advice in all 3 categories. So that app we developed and launched this past March, and we're very excited about where that's going and what that's headed out to do. Mm-hmm. How I got here has kind of been an interesting journey. I started out right out of college, although I was a political science major. For some reason, finance always caught my attention. And I started off working with my father in his insurance agency. And that was my intro to Finance 101. Mm-hmm. I was, at the time, 20 years old, college graduate, trying to figure out what to do. I became the youngest female chartered life underwriter, CLU. So I thought I was going to be insurance all my career, but that didn't happen. I actually left, I think about 10 years into my career after we kind of sold one of the entities I'd started. And I went to work for Apple Computer, thinking I was going to be a computer scientist because I was kind of thrown into that, I would say, in a sense. In my father's insurance agency, felt like computers would enable us to do more with less. Mm-hmm. He was of a different mindset and a different generation, so he thought I was a little nutty, but went along with it. And once he saw success with that, he was very supportive. And then I was going to go back to school to get a master's in computer science. But that derailed when a friend said, come work with me at Apple first. See if you really love it before you go back. And that's what I did. So I was at Apple, about eight years.
Okay.
And discovered that, no, I didn't want to do a master's in computer science, and I did not want to be a programmer for the rest of my life. And instead developed HR systems.
Okay.
So I was really setting up a global HR system, and this is back in the 90s, and automating all employee benefits at the desktop. Mm. And when I did that, I realized, wow, people really don't know what they're doing with their money. Wow. Even if they're making a lot of money, they had no idea what they were doing with their money. Mm-hmm. And that really drove me to write the first white paper on this subject in 1992. So it was a little ahead of its time.
Yeah. No kidding.
And I thought at that time, if we didn't build it then, the idea would be taken by somebody else.
Yeah.
And here we are 20 years later, and obviously that's not the case, or actually almost 30 years later.
Wow.
And that's not the case. So it's taken a long time to get there, but we're there.
So what was the idea in that initial white paper, and what was kind of your driving hypothesis about this is something that we should care more about and that we should do and put action around?
Yeah, what I saw, and actually the white paper is the 3 Nickels product. today. So what I saw is we did all three of those things through payroll deduction and through many of our employee benefit programs. We had United Way for giving. We had our 401k plan for saving. We also had a savings bond plan at that time for saving. We had a credit union. We had all these various different tools, but inevitably employees were still making very poor decisions overall with their money. And much of that was because all these tools that we were building out were very siloed. And so, they might use one tool and not another tool. They might get good information here, but not there. And so I recognized pretty early on people needed advice. They needed help. The challenge of it is, in order to really do that, we needed the technology to get to a further place.
Sure.
Because the calculations are so significant, you're not going to be able to do it until the technology caught up to where we could do the number of calculations we have to do in a rapid enough speed. So that's really where the idea was generated. It took me, surprisingly, another 3 career moves before we could get there.
Wow.
And when I finally ended up at Trust Company of the West and we were going to build this tool out, technology was getting close to being able to do it. That's when I partnered with Dr. Harry Markowitz. He's the Nobel laureate for modern portfolio theory, or the easy way to understand, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And we spun off from TCW in 1999, and the journey began. And built out really one of the first AI products or solutions that would help people figure out how much to save and where to invest to hit their retirement goal.
Yeah.
So, that's been the journey thus far.
Yeah. So through all of that, kind of the twists and turns, and I just say, I already have a takeaway here from idea born in 1992, and then you're really launching kind of the fulfillment of that product, you said a couple years ago with 3 Nickels.
Yeah.
Right. And that's just so, on the one hand, I'm sure when you're living it, it's like, why am I not there yet? But for me, just, there's so many things that I get passionate about and that I say, there's a need that needs to be met. But for whatever reason, the timing isn't right, or I don't have the resource that I need, or I don't have the right partner to help me move it along. And so, that's already my takeaway is okay, how am I keeping the ball moving on some of those rather than just moving on to the next shiny penny, over down the road. So, okay. So through all of that, you made moves, you kept incrementally moving closer to where you were going. I assume there's some sort of driving purpose. And so I'm curious, do you have words for that? Some people call it, your why, Simon Sinek would say, or your North Star, or your reason to get out of bed in the morning. What is that purpose for you? And has it changed over time? And maybe when's the first time that you were able to identify, this is something unique to me that really is my driver?
Yeah, for me, I've always known my why is I want to see people free. I want to see people reach their destiny.
Yeah.
That has always been my why in life. It really didn't matter what I was doing.
Yeah.
But what I saw is the number one barrier, especially as I mentored people along, what I would hear over and over is, I can't afford to. And so they really used money as being the barrier to taking the steps that they needed to take in order to reach their destiny.
Yeah.
And I thought, now we got to remove that barrier. Right. It's an easy one to blame.
Yeah.
So that's really been my why overall. How I got to that why, again, I don't know. I had it from such a young age. Like I said, with 3 Nickels, it's save, spend, give. Well, that was my allowance when I was 4 years old. I was taught you give one away, you save one, and you spend one. Now, I'm one of 6 kids, and I'm the only one who kind of stuck to that message my whole life. I never deviated from the message. And what I saw is I never got into money trouble my whole life. I never got into money trouble, but I just stuck to that. And I had siblings who didn't necessarily stick to that and did end up in money troubles.
Right.
So I could see the value of the lesson, and then I could see how many people didn't get lessons like that when they were growing up.
Yeah.
And so they had no idea how to manage their money. They had no one really guiding them. It's not necessarily an open conversation, even in families. It's not an open conversation necessarily in our culture.
Yeah.
And yet it's the most destructive force for many people. And it's the one that they would, for the most part, blame the reason they can't get to their destiny. So my passion is remove the barrier.
Yeah.
Remove the barrier. It's not an easy thing to do. And I have to laugh because I think about it, 30 years of persevering to try to get it done kind of one person at a time is an unbelievable challenge. But what we did see is we saw followers come in behind us. The overall, I would say, the marketplace is expanding and growing, which is always a great thing because that means more people's needs are being met.
Yeah.
So we're seeing it take off. But yeah, it took 30 years to get there.
We've had some conversations a couple times. We've had the opportunity to meet. And what strikes me about you, Sherrie, is your passion and how much you care about people. And so you work in this kind of financial technology space, but really the overall, I just see the care and love for people shine through. And so, and we're meeting here at Nahara. And so I know tribal entities and Native American communities is one of your areas that you're passionate about. I know you work in some other different underserved areas as well. I'm curious, why? Why do you care about these particular communities?
Yeah, for me, well, the tribal community is really a dream come true. I worked with my uncle for a number of years. He's of the Chippewa Nation, and he was one of the first medical doctors amongst the tribal nation people.
Wow.
And because of that, and this was back in the 60s, obviously he experienced a lot of racial discrimination.
Yeah.
We would do things with my cousins, and we would experience it as well. Even though I looked as white can be, I take after my father, so he's Scottish, so I've got the white look.
Yeah.
But we would be together in a group, and we'd see that racial discrimination. So I have always had a heart for the oppressed. Anybody who has suffered. And that's kind of been something I just grew up in and around. But I watched my uncle as I grew up. I would help him recruit from the U.S. universities. He was trying to recruit people to serve in the First Nations people, especially in Canada, because he spearheaded a lot of the medical system, the Canadian medical system for First Nations people or Aboriginals. And so with that, I saw the struggles he had in getting tribal people to go to college, getting them to take up medicine, getting the Western medicine and the Native medicine integrated together. He was very innovative. So I was kind of fortunate to see somebody innovating in the space. He came up with a board game that would kind of teach Western medical principles with Native principles and get that integration going. He did so much in trying to grow the bridge. I kind of call it a bridge, but also to grow the population that would serve the First Nations people. And it took him. At the time he started in 1980, there were 6 medical doctors from tribal nations.
Wow,
6. I mean that. It blew my mind.
Yeah.
I thought it was 10 years, but it was in 1980, not that long ago.
Oh.
And I thought it took them 10 years to get 60, but it was actually 15 years to get 60 medical doctors from tribal nations. And so I realized, he was constantly kind of bucking the system, but making change. He was making change, just kind of one person at a time. And so my heart kind of was the same, to do the same in the tribal nations, but from the finance perspective and helping people, manage their money and manage their assets. And at the time, we really didn't have any way to really get in and start working with, the tribal people in a mass way.
Yeah.
Because apart from technology, you really can't. There's no way to serve the population. So we needed the Three Nickels tool to actually be able to make that next step.
Right.
So that's why I'm so excited to serve and kind of follow in his footsteps. I feel like I'm standing on his shoulders to kind of take it to that next level with
Yeah.
finance.
Wonderful. And then I've heard you mention a couple times you do work in inner cities as well.
Yeah.
What's your connection to those communities? And again, where does the passion come from?
Yeah, that actually is another wild story. It comes, I think, from my family. I just grew up in a family that embraced everybody. And if you look at our extended family photos, it looks hysterical. I think we have every race in there. But my father, one of his best friends, ended up being a pastor who grew up in Mississippi, was scared to death of white people. And my dad, who grew up in northern Michigan, and like I said earlier, is as white can be, they became best of friends. And actually, he's a Black pastor, Baptist pastor in the inner city of Oakland. And my father was, an insurance guy from Los Gatos in, suburbs of Silicon Valley. And they just clicked and connected. And we began as a family really trying to help in the inner city of Oakland. But that gave me a passion for the inner city and recognizing, again, another group that really hasn't had the opportunities that other people have had.
Yeah.
And so we began teaching math and computer science and finance in those areas and saw that you can affect change if people understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing that feels unique about what you do is, I've heard you talk a lot about people recognizing, really understanding what they value, and then aligning their financial planning and practices around that. Yeah. So when we talk about things like understanding our values, how do you do that? How do you help people understand their values, or maybe if they even have words already for their values, how that applies to their financial planning? What's your approach there?
Yeah, that's a great question because that is not easy for people to figure out. Most people will think they have a set of values and they'll say what their values are. Yeah. And ironically, even with the Save, Spend, Give, we wanted to initially help people by just allowing them to order those in the way that they would order it in their lives. Yeah. But what we found is the words and the music usually didn't match. Like they might say, well, I'll give, then I'll save, then I spend. But that's not what they do. They actually spend, they save whatever they have, and they never get around to giving.
Yeah.
Right.
And so what we discovered was it wasn't something people normally sat down and thought about. It was something they just did. And they oftentimes did it not even realizing that they were doing it according to their real values, but they didn't want to believe that that was their real value. So what we ended up having to do is really get people, as we coach them, to write out the budget and what they're actually doing. That in turn now shows you the values you're living.
Yeah.
Now, whether you want that to be what you're doing, it is what you're doing. So now there becomes a process where you have to now bridge from what they're doing to what they want to be doing. And it's a very rare day, I would say, that we see people doing what they want to be doing with their finances. Once we bridge that, it becomes easy. They get on track and they can go on direction and on point.
That's really interesting. We talk a lot about purpose and identity and values and commitments on this podcast. And one of the things that, we know from the social psychology is, and how the brain works is, we can choose who we want to become. And when we become intentional about, I want to be the kind of person who, we can see our actions start aligning with that. But if we don't act in a way that affirms that identity, eventually we'll have cognitive dissonance and we'll either change who we want to be to match with what we're doing.
Yeah.
If it doesn't go the other way,
Absolutely.
right? And so part of intentional leadership, which is really our common theme on this podcast, is, let's choose what kind of leader we want to be, what kind of person we want to be, what kind of organization we want to be, what is the greatest good that we're here to achieve, and what are the behavioral commitments that we will make to support whatever values that will affirm that identity and that purpose. And so that's just, I've never really thought about it in light of financial decisions that explicitly, right? Yes, I've started kind of scratching the surface on, okay, values really do matter in how we spend, how we save, how we give. But to think about how we can make it explicit and get intentional about, this is what I value. I want to be the kind of person who expresses these values. Yeah. And here are some tools that I can use to make sure I actually make those, make a commitment to that in my financial life.
Yeah, make it real.
Yeah, I love that.
That's exactly our goal, because we do see that where your money goes, that's your true values.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear any stories that come to mind. Who's someone who said, this is something that I care deeply about, but I'm seeing now, maybe through coaching, that I'm not living my financial life in alignment with that. Any stories of someone who is able to be intentional and make that change?
Yeah, we love those stories. Those are our favorite. We have quite a few young people who really have had, I would say, drastic change. So we had one case, just an easy, fun one, is a young man. He was going to go out and buy a brand new 4Runner, or if he couldn't afford a new one, he was going to get, one a couple years old. And so then he used the tool on how much car can I afford. And he saw that, well, he could afford the 4Runner, but it pretty much wiped him out on all of his extra money.
Right.
And so he looked at it, and on that tool, it'll tell you kind of your maximum, but it will also give you a number that says, here's what you probably should spend. He looked at the should spend, and he thought, okay, I should find a vehicle that fits that. So he went from his 4Runner to a Subaru Crosstrek, which I thought was kind of humorous because, obviously the 4Runner has kind of an image associated with it as well, for a young guy especially. Yeah. And for him to go from that to a Crosstrek really taught him that the image was not what matters. Overall, it was his values that mattered. So that was one that we just
And how
was
did
very
that
simple.
show up in the tool? Like, what was it that made him have that aha of like, okay, I guess the image of driving this particular vehicle isn't that important in the grand scheme of things?
And that was exactly it. What he saw is on his budget, he would have no money left. And he realized buying a car wasn't his only goal.
Right.
And so with that, he recognized, do I really just want to put all my money into this one car so I can, feel cool for whatever, the season of that the car works? Yeah. Or do I want to finance my other objectives as well?
Because he had some other goals that he wanted to get to.
But the funny thing is, he didn't use the advice tool. He was on the free tool.
Okay.
And he was just looking at the car and the budget and recognized that, okay, he wouldn't be able to do anything else.
Right.
So just with that free tool input, he saw the difference and went with the less expensive car.
Yeah. Another thing that I think is really unique about your approach that we've talked about a little bit is this idea of how does trauma impact the way that we relate to our finances. And I know for us, especially when we're working in an area that's been under-resourced for generations, if we don't go in with some sort of information or informed nature of our approach to say, well, how are we going to talk about trauma? How are we going to create space for people to heal on some level, for people to reflect enough to understand, hey, I've had some experiences in life that probably predispose me to act in one way, lead in one way, rather than the way that aligns with the vision of how I want to lead.
Right.
If we don't do that, we're missing a step. We know
Absolutely.
that. We know that most leadership training, there is an element of retraining, of unlearning some things that our environment has taught us, or even that our DNA has taught us,
Yes.
right? So I'm curious how you think about this idea of healing, and maybe traumatic experience or generational impact of relationship with finance. And how do you approach that?
Yeah, that's huge. And that's another one that's near and dear to my heart. Most probably because I adopted 2 boys from Russia. They were 6 and 7 years old when I adopted them. They are siblings, but obviously loaded with a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
And you talk about the DNA component. They were really too young to have any kind of money issues per se.
Sure.
Yet in both of them, they have what we would call a poverty mindset. And we had to kind of train them and break through that. Through a lot of that process of learning about trauma and neuroscience, we decided to build that into the tool. A lot of what we could build into the tool initially. Yeah. And we're right now in the process of adding additional tools for healing that especially deal with what we would call the pseudo joys. What's happening in the brain very frequently when it comes to money is that people are trying to fill the void of really what they need is the relational, I'm happy to be with you, that relational joy. Yeah. And they don't have that, so they go fill it with what we would call a pseudo joy. With money, it's very commonly going to manifest itself in, overspending. So you'll have, a shopaholic, gambling, that would be a big one, and an addiction to gambling. But it can also do things in a way that look culturally appropriate, like a poverty mindset. I can't spend. And poverty mindset, because there's 2 sides to that coin. One is I can't spend anything, and I just kind of become a Scrooge. Yeah. And the other is I spend everything because tomorrow I might die. Right. But both have that poverty mindset to it. And you have to work both through our financial coaching as well as through our classes, as well as what we're building into the tool to get at that deeper level in the brain. It's really going into the subconscious component. We understand very well with trauma, some people are going to grab onto it and get the healing and others are not.
Yeah.
And so we don't have an unrealistic expectation that, all of this is going to get healed. But we do look at it as one person at a time. You can make baby steps, and that does change the DNA for the next generation.
Yeah, it's a fascinating idea, this idea of generational poverty, a generational scarcity mindset when you come from generations of protecting what you have because you may not have any more, right? Versus an abundance mindset where there's the belief that there's always enough to go around for everyone. Yeah. We see it in business too, right?
Oh, yeah,
Businesses operate from either a place of scarcity and protection or a place of abundance and generosity. Yeah. And just that idea that those things get inherited through our DNA. It gets encoded into our DNA, and it can be changed as we expand our mindset, grow our mindset, and our outlook. That has an impact on the next generation.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the beauty of the brain. It's neuroplastic.
Yeah.
So it can be changed. And then that has huge impact on that next generation and huge impact on cultures. Yeah. And sometimes, changing a culture is exceedingly difficult. Yeah. I work in Morocco with young Muslim women, really trying there to impact culture by impacting their leaders. Yeah. It's a long process. So you do have to have perseverance in your DNA to accomplish these things. But, in my mindset, anything is possible. So you just do it one person at a time, and breaking through that poverty mindset is possible. We've seen it in other cultures, so it can be done.
Yeah, I'm really reminded of the conversation we had on this podcast with Dr. Chan Hellman about hope and this idea of, hope really has a few different components that have to be present. This vision of a better tomorrow. Yeah. But then the second one, which I think you're really addressing here, is a pathway. Mm-hmm. So not only can I envision a better tomorrow or something, some vision for myself, now I see the steps. I see if I do A, B, C, it's likely that I'll be able to get there. And then the last piece is, do I have the agency or the power to walk that pathway? Do I believe that I can make that decision and do something differently? Mm-hmm. And I just love this idea of the tool that you're bringing to the table to say, there is a pathway. Mm-hmm. If you do this, look, here's what can happen to your life financially. Mm-hmm. I grew up in, rural Mid-South kind of area. And it's not unusual at all to walk into, a trailer home and there's an Xbox and an iPhone and whatever else sitting there. Yeah. And I think that's just a really great illustration of, well, if I don't have a pathway to financial security, then it doesn't matter this month how I spend my money.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
If there's no realistic path that I'm ever going to be secure, why would I not today want to go do something that brings me some measure of joy and escape and fulfillment and connection with my friends and whatever that is. Yeah. So that missing piece of pathways, it just feels like you're really giving that. And then I want to learn more about the education and kind of the advisory services as well, because I think that goes into that last part. Well, can I do it? Do I have what it takes? Do I have a growth mindset that believes I can behave differently tomorrow than I did yesterday?
Yeah, I think that is key. I mean, we have actually different levels of education because we recognize everybody's at a different place. Yeah. So we've got a 6-week, really kind of a beginner course that anybody can do. Mm-hmm. And it's really kind of written even at a lower level so that it makes... Really, how I look at finance is it's a foreign language. Yeah. I mean, we talk in acronyms and all sorts of words that nobody understands right out of the chute. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't even care if you're a college graduate. You could have your PhD. We deal with them all the time because we have so many universities and that. But they don't understand this stuff. So it really is its own language. You have to break it down into very simple terms. When you do that, even children understand it. So we know that, and then we take that beginner course and build from there. That's the first step. But we also know kind of, I guess you would call it the Weight Watchers model. If you've seen that, they always have a leader or a coach, or there's always going to be a human component because you got to get that motivation. Mm-hmm. And the best technology can't motivate. Right. There just isn't that opportunity. You don't have that mutual mind share that can go on that you can have when you're with people. So there is that piece of a financial coach that can help get people through. There's live Q&A, so there's interaction to where I can get my needs met and addressed, because that oftentimes is another stopping point. Mm-hmm. And really what we're trying to do is eliminate the intimidation factor. Make it simple. Make it so that anybody can digest it, anybody can do it. Right. Now what we see happens is once somebody has learned, they want more. Mm-hmm. Because once you start to save and you see your money growing, now you want to know more. Mm-hmm. So then we have a whole series of classes. There's hundreds of them. You can go as far as you want and as deep as you want, and you can pretty much learn as much as you want. Yeah. But you don't have to in order to be successful, and I think that's the key. The key is all you need is that baseline 6-week course, and you can be successful in reaching your financial goals. Mm. Don't need to know more. Right. But you can. Yeah. If you want to. You can dive in as deep as you want.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. I just keep thinking about this notion of the best technology can't motivate. I think at best, technology can be really good at manipulating. Yeah. Because we know enough about how the brain works, and a lot of technology is optimized for habit formation, for tapping into dopamine release and, creating actions habitual. Right. So, and that's part of reaching a goal is to create habits. Right. And so I do think that's one way that technology can help if we, depends on how we use it and why we use it and even how it was designed. Yes. But this whole other component of the human connection, how that is what really taps into our true motivation to feel seen, heard, valued, connect with another human being, creating intentional connection and community. And that's really our overall why and purpose, and why we do the work that we do, is to help foster connection and community.
Right.
And that's when I believe we can really connect with true motivation for people, right? Not just manipulate behavior.
Right. Yeah, and that's really what we're after, because if you really change at the core value level, what you're doing to match what you really believe or want to be doing, you do begin to change behavior, and it doesn't take manipulation at all. In fact, I'd say the opposite. I would say manipulation is what got us to where we're at.
Right.
You really, what we're trying to do is match you with what you really want. And at that point, we know to keep people on track, oftentimes there needs to be a safe human that they can interact with. And that safety is the key, especially where there's been trauma, especially when you're trying to get out of an addiction or something, that has to do with your money. That's not been a safe place for you. You need that safety. So I absolutely agree that technology has a lot that it can offer, as long as it's used appropriately.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm a leader in my organization, in my family, in my place I volunteer, wherever it is. And I'm interested in saying, wow, how do I get these people that I have some influence over and that I'm stewarding on a day-to-day basis? How do I get them this resource? I'd like to learn more. What's that customer journey, as you partner with folks who are wanting to bring these resources to their people?
Yeah, for leaders, it's really optimal. This is something I learned watching behavior at Apple Computer. At that time, we had manufacturing in the States. And what we would see very frequently is if the supervisor on the line was in the 401k plan, 90% plus rate that you were going to be in the 401k plan, because that supervisor would tell you, get in the 401k plan. Now, we also found that supervisor, if they were in a certain mutual fund, guess what? Everybody on the line was going to be in that same mutual fund. And that necessarily wasn't always the best answer.
Right.
So we recognize the leaders have significant influence, and it did affect people's choices. What we wanted to do, though, was get the leader to get the tools in place to then direct people to use the tools so they could get the right answer for them, not necessarily what the leader was doing.
Right.
That's really what we've done with 3 Nickels. Is we get the leaders to use the tool. Once they've used the tool, sometimes they even go through what we would call the 3 Nickels University, the 6-week courses. They do that, then they turn around and influence others to do the same. And in some instances, they even become a financial coach, or what we would call a pod leader, where they're now motivating the others in their group to stay the course. We have financial coaches as well internally that help the pod leaders to lead their pod, but it's kind of a, coach and train the trainer and coach the coaches and get them to then turn around and lead their people. Because that way you have people everywhere.
Yeah. What's an example of a implementation or someone who started using 3 Nickels as an organization? How did that go, and what kind of outcomes are you seeing?
Yeah, we're just starting with most of the organizations at this point for 3 Nickels. We've seen it on the GuidedChoice side.
Or maybe an example from
know
GuidedChoice.
The numbers really well there. In those cases where we do a whole education rollout, we generally see about a 35% uptake. Which is huge numbers in our industry, because most people will ignore finance. They're too intimidated, so they keep their head in the sand. So to get 35% in your first year on an uptake is huge. And then what happens is it grows over time, because now the word of mouth begins to work and become effective. So that's kind of the method that we've used, I would say, in best practices, but we don't always get that opportunity. We've rolled out to some like large states, and we can't get out out there and meet with everybody. So it's really more of an automated journey where it's going into their newsletter, into emails, and even there we'll get a 25% uptake.
Yeah.
So I would call that a very low touch approach versus the high touch. Our preference obviously is high touch because you can motivate the people better. And even, I would say, even educate more easily when you're there. It's much harder through technology even to educate oftentimes. Or get people engaged, I should say. With Three Nickels, we're just starting, so we just launched our first, and we've done it with a small group. So we've got a group of 31 that's now running through the university and using the tool, and we're looking for the numbers coming out of that. It's a small group. When we have small companies that have begun to use it, and we'll be then taking those numbers to figure out best practices to roll it into our larger organizations who are launching. Actually, the first state launches in about 2 months, so we don't have a whole lot of time to figure it out.
Right.
Very good. I mean, that's helpful to hear those types of outcomes. And that kind of leads me to the next question, which is generational impact. Yeah. So I know that that's something that you've talked about, something that you all focus your outcomes on. So when you say your personal purpose is that you want to see people free, really removing barriers between them and their freedom to live into their destiny, how do you see that playing out over time? You know, I'm imagining ripples across a pond. Like, what's your hope for that legacy that the work you're doing now is going to leave?
Yeah, I mean, to us, that's really the most critical component, because when you look at, the financial legacy of America right now, it's debt. And if you look at the history of debt, for most of us, we might think we've always had debt. No, I mean, it's really since the late 1970s that debt began. And it really hasn't exploded until like the last decade. And when you look at the effects of debt overall, and where we're headed with the effects of debt, there is no place to go that's positive.
Yeah.
Not with the numbers that we're looking at. And so when you really see the impact of that, it's on the magnitude, as far as I can tell, to the effects that the Depression had on people. Now, the Depression had the effect, and they've done plenty of studies on the generation subsequent and then the generations after that, where, they had a poverty mindset.
Yeah.
And they saved everything they could possibly save, and they used everything they could possibly use. It created a lot of stress on them. And we saw that kind of trickle down. And then debt seemed to provide a freedom, people thought, and yet, ironically, it really enslaved them. I mean, they didn't realize the impact of debt. And, again, initially it was used in a wise way. Mortgages, that's an asset, and usually an appreciating asset. And when you use debt on a potentially appreciating asset, we would call that leverage. That's usually a good use of debt. So I'm not, negative on all debt. But if you use it on either a depreciating asset or on something like going out to dinner on a credit card, and then there's nothing afterwards, that's a poor use of debt. And we've gone to the place of using it for everything with a mindset of, if I can make my monthly payment, I'm okay. When we look at the impact on generations, it started with credit cards. Well, it started with mortgages. Mortgages were fine. Then it went to credit card debt, which really increased. Then it went to college debt. So by the time you're 18, before your brain is even completely formed, you are already in a significant amount of debt.
Yeah.
To where now the average millennial is carrying $63,000 of non-mortgage debt.
Wow.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah. And so what we've done is we're literally training the brain to live on debt. That's a dangerous position to be in.
Yeah.
And what we're doing with the tool is really showing people you don't have to. That's not something you have to live under. And it's not even possible, albeit I know some government officials might say they could pay off the debt. We can't. We just create more debt. And so it's not really paying off debt, it's shifting debt. And as we shift
creating
debt
in another area to pay off debt in some other area.
It's how my mom used to say she paid her pediatric bill with all those children. She was always borrowing from Peter to pay Paul.
Yeah.
And there is that kind of concept, but she was doing it with little numbers and eventually did get out of debt. But in this situation, we're doing it with huge numbers and it becomes very difficult. You don't want the brain trained in debt, and that's what we're doing. So, in fact, what we're trying to do with the tool is the exact opposite. Mm-hmm. Train the brain in reality, because we're really right now not living realistically.
Yeah.
And we need to get back on track with reality.
Right.
And that's our goal.
Yeah. So what's next? When you look down the road, 5 years, 10 years for 3 Nickels, for Guided Choice, what are the things that you're striving towards? What are you excited about? What are maybe the things that are like, man, I don't know, if everything goes right, maybe we could get to here and that would be super exciting.
Yeah, I mean, for us, with Guided Choice, we have great numbers because we've been around for over 20 years. We know it works.
Yeah.
When we say what really excites us, it's that on average, when people use our tool, on average, they increase their savings for retirement 110%.
Wow.
Now that is a wow, because nobody would say you could double savings rates. And we do. We more than double savings rates. So that made it very exciting for us. And I mean, we have clients even, we have a large Fortune 100 fast food restaurant. So many of those employees are, working in a fast food restaurant.
Right.
And even they were getting to 80% income replacement in the majority.
Wow.
So well over 70% could get over 80% income replacement at retirement. That excites us. When we see those kind of numbers, we see that people use it. And then in that case, we actually printed it out and they got paper. But it was the same technology, just print out and send it to them to make it easier on them. In that era. So we've seen significant changes both in savings rates as well as in how people are invested, which for us is all about the outcomes. Are you able to retire when you want to retire with an income replacement that enables you to do so?
Yeah.
And we see across the board people are able to. And even with 2008, we didn't see people dropping off because it's built into our tool, those expectations. Right. So what we've seen on the retirement side, we really want to see manifested overall on the household finance side through 3 Nickels. We know already it's effective for retirement.
Yeah.
We've seen in anecdotal forms, because it's relatively new, but we've seen people changing their behavior already when they're using 3 Nickels. And so what we'd like to see, ideally, are the users getting out of debt? Are they saving for retirement? And do they have an emergency fund set aside?
Yeah.
Those would be the 3 primary measurements that we would care most about. Now, if you reach those goals, then the next item would be, because we would say, okay, those are all your needs. If you're meeting your needs, you're wealthy. Most people don't think like this, but you are now wealthy.
Yeah.
And now if you can begin to meet some of your wants from a global vantage point, you're very wealthy.
Yeah.
If you can now meet some or all of your wants, you're beyond wealthy.
Yeah.
So you can now begin to give back.
And then if you can meet your needs and wants and then still be able to meet someone else's needs and wants,
to get them started on track, the gift goes on. So our objective has always been to see these metrics shift. As far as the penetration that we would like to see with 3 Nickels or tools like them, it's not like you have to just use 3 Nickels. At this point, it's the only one out there that does it. So at this point, you're kind of stuck with 3 Nickels, but people will follow. And so, there'll be more and there'll be competitors in that. But really, we would love to see, as 14 states have already legislated, now you have to have financial education at the high school level. So when you see those kinds of numbers, you should be expecting that 80% of the population should be using tools like this. Because once you're aware, once you've become what we would call financially literate, 67% of those individuals will use an advisor. But for many people, you don't have the money to spend on an advisor, really. And what 3 Nickels does is it democratizes advice so that anybody can afford it. that's the key. So now you should be able to get out there and penetrate the population.
Yeah.
Now, what are some of the barriers? Well, some of the barriers will be financial services companies who've been making a lot of money off your debt.
Yeah.
They're not going to be happy about this. So there's going to be a lot of very large entities who will come up against tools like these. And we just have to keep fighting the fight.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm an individual, might be listening to this podcast, and I'm curious about the tool. Can I go on the App Store and download 3 Nickels app and start playing with it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And, there's plenty of education built in to that free version. The free version, like I said, will give you even solid, very good answers because it's the same chassis as the advice. It's just that it's looking only at the one question. It's
Right.
not all inclusive.
Yeah.
And there's good reason for that from a technology perspective.
Sure.
It's very complex in the numbers that we run because we run thousands of iterations. We're actually doing Monte Carlo simulation behind the scenes to calculate ranges of returns and ranges of expectations because obviously, as we all now know, markets go up and down.
Yep.
And we have to take a look at all possible scenarios for the future and give you ranges. It's a lot of calculations that
Yep.
go into it.
So you can start interacting with the free tool, get answers to some siloed questions,
Yep.
but then if you want really holistic advice that looks broadly at all the categories of your life and goals,
Yep.
then you would get a paid version and you would get a different level of advice. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, so that's your option when you're on the free version. If we have your email, you may also get an invite to the university program, the 3 Nickels University. We've had grant money provided to be able to get that education out to individuals.
Cool.
So you would get an invite, you can sign up, you can go through the 6-week program, and you would have access to the paid version for free for 6 weeks.
Okay.
I'd also get you 2 financial coaching sessions. So it's really, I think, a value proposition you can't
Yeah.
beat.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm going to go sign up. So
Yeah.
this has been a really, really interesting conversation, Sherrie. Always
you.
appreciate meeting you and just connecting and sharing ideas about, making a positive impact on people's lives. So
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
appreciate you. I appreciate what you guys are doing in the leadership space. As you know, and as I've discussed, there's such a void out there. I've been in corporate America. I mentor a lot of young people in the Silicon Valley. They're desperate for help in understanding leadership. So, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing and keep up the good work.
thank you.
Thank you. And so, just kind of my final takeaway here as we're talking, I love, value proposition number 1 of this podcast and this conversation today is, well, I know about 3 Nickels and I can go download that and play with that. And I hope everyone listening, great, that's awesome. But also for leaders, like the other thing that I hear behind this is, Sherrie, your story about clarity about what matters to you, seeing people free, seeing them be able to move into their destiny without finances being a barrier. And the rest of your story has been, how have you operationalized that purpose? How have you made that real by being an entrepreneur and by dedicating all of these hours every day towards creating something that actually removes the financial barrier for people? And so if I'm listening to this as a leader, and reflecting on that, I think the questions that come up are, am I as clear about my purpose? And how do I make sure that every day the energy that I'm putting forth is aligned with my purpose in such a way that over decades, I am seeing outcomes like Sherrie is seeing with the things that you've created. And so, that could be in small ways, right? It doesn't always have to be entrepreneurial, right? It could be in my role as a member of this team. What is my purpose? What really is the thing that drives my passion, drives my energy? How do I unleash that onto this team? How do I move this team forward in a way that aligns with my purpose? Maybe you're guest facing or customer facing, right? What is it that you really believe, that you're really passionate about, that you bring into all of those interactions with the people that you're serving day in and day out? Or maybe you are at that executive leader role. And how do we shape an organization to really fulfill a purpose, to be purpose built, purpose forward, purpose first in what we're talking about at meetings, how we prioritize strategy, how we resource strategy and growth, and how we develop our people so that everyone can be aligned around advancing that purpose. So I just love hearing the story about how you've done that, and appreciate the story, and also appreciate everyone listening today. So if folks want to find you, we mentioned the App Store, but where else? Website, LinkedIn, like what's a good way for folks to get in contact with you?
It's all of the above.
Yeah.
We have GuidedChoice.com. So that's, again, on the retirement space. And so anybody nearing retirement, that's definitely the tools you'd be directed towards. For others, it's 3 Nickels, and there is 3nickels.com, as well as the App Store. So you can easily download it there. I'm on LinkedIn, so Sherrie Grabot, but as is Guided Choice, as well as 3 Nickels, is on LinkedIn, Instagram. I know they have different addresses for each of these, and I'm not sure what they are. So I would say
I bet we can search and find it.
LinkedIn is easiest, or the websites are, I think, the easiest.
Yeah.
Great.
So we will put links in the show notes. And for everyone listening, if you want to get a hold of us, purposeandperformancegroup.com, magicintheroom.com. If you want to watch a video version of the podcast, it's uploaded to YouTube at the Purpose and Performance Group channel. And so thank you so much for spending your time with us. If we can serve you in any way, help you clarify or operationalize your purpose, give us a shout. And thank you. Let's go all win the day in alignment with our purpose today.
Wonderful. Have a great day.
Yeah.
Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Hannah Bretterow, and Luke Freeman, and produced by Ben West. Theme music is by Evan Grimm. Title track Fake Love, available on Apple Music. And this podcast was recorded at Storycatcher Studio with video and audio editing and production support by Brad O'Hara and Alicia Crum, with inspiration, strategy and technical support by yours truly, Neil Hughes. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com, and remember, previous episodes are available at magicintheroom.com.